the club. Say hi, baby. No, someone would rather chew her hand. So today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the things I wish I knew about breastfeeding before having a baby. Because it's World Breastfeeding Week, I want to celebrate breastfeeding and share some of my journey of breastfeeding with you and share some of the things that I found out now that I'm breastfeeding. It feels like when I wasn't pregnant or before having a baby, I did not talk about breastfeeding half as much, and because of that I did not know half as much as there is to know about breastfeeding, and there's a lot to know, and it feels like I found out most of the things I knew about breastfeeding once I started breastfeeding. So I thought, why not share a video about some of the things I wish I knew, and hope that it's helpful to some new mums out there, any pregnant mums, and if not, at least you're hearing my journey breastfeeding. Someone wants to eat my hand. But yes, anyway, number one is how much of a full-time job breastfeeding is. It feels like I'm always feeding, doesn't it? It feels like I'm always feeding you. Oh gosh, someone wants to eat now. She's proper sucking on my hand. Oh, Baba. Okay, someone's hungry. But yes, it feels like I'm constantly breastfeeding. I saw like memes comparing the hours you spend breastfeeding to hours you spent in a full-time job, and it's very comparable, and trust me, it feels like a full-time job, especially in the early stages. Now, you know, we've gotten into a routine and we've gotten used to it, so like we know what we're doing, and it doesn't feel so much as a job. It feels just natural and something that we do. But yes, at the start it very much did feel like I was always feeding. Number two is long feeds, cluster feeding. I know there's several names for it, but I learned it as cluster feeding, and cluster feeding was the bane of my life. It was, I say the bane of my life, it wasn't that bad, I'm exaggerating. But when it first started, when Chireya was 6 weeks old, it lasted from when she was 6 weeks to 8 weeks old. But when it first started, and I was just completely blown and boggled by what was happening, it felt like, was I not doing it right? Did I not have a good supply? Was my supply low? Why is she feeding constantly? And I took to Pinterest, which has been my mummy saviour. Any questions I have, I normally just go to Pinterest. But anyway, I took to Pinterest and I started finding out that more about cluster feeding. And then once I joined my this group I'm a part of on Facebook, my breastfeeding community, I found out more about cluster feeding, and I was able to then deal with it and just like recognise that it was natural as she was going through. I'm not sure if it was a growth spurt or a developmental leap or mental leap, either one of them, but she was going through one of them, and she just wanted to feed because she just needed that comfort. And that's what it is. A lot of it was just that sucking for comfort more than anything, and it was really helpful because I found out that it was only natural and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. I just had to keep going with it. So I persevered. And having that community was really helpful during those cluster feeding periods, because it was nice to know that I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one going through it. And to know that it was normal just, you know, made me feel less hard on myself. But yes, we need to talk about cluster feeding prior to childbirth, because it's something that can just take you by surprise and surprise you. Number three of the things I wish I knew is how much pumping is an effort. I hate pumping so much. I hate everything about it. I find it time consuming. Like breastfeeding itself is a full-time job. It feels like pumping's a part-time job. It's so annoying. And in those days when I was cluster feeding and worrying about whether my supply was low, I did things to try and increase my supply. And one of the advice that I got was pumping 30 minutes to an hour after every feed. But this was too much effort, and it just felt like I couldn't sustain it, because after feeding I'd want to do something, but I'd have to sit there and pump. So Curtis was doing most things for me, making me food, and it felt like I wasn't able to do things, which contributes to making breastfeeding feel like a full-time job, and it can make the cluster feeding even feel even harder. But whilst I was cluster feeding, I got no time to pump at all. So trying to follow the pumping 30 minutes an hour after every feed just felt tiring, because I'd already spent like I think the max I got one time was up to 2 hours trying to breastfeeding. Actually, it wasn't 2 hours straight, but it was like 45 minutes, I think, and she took a break. But after, just spending that 2 hours holding a baby and her attached to me, the last thing I wanted to do was pump. I just wanted to chill. So pumping's not for me. I know there's mothers out there that exclusively pump, and you guys are heroes, because that is a lot of effort, and I admire you putting that effort in, because I just can't. So what I do is I use the hacker pump. I love it. I'm always raving about it, and I attach it to the other side of my boob whilst I'm nursing, and it just gathers. Once I found that, I think that's probably what made me stop pumping, because I was like, actually, wait, I can still collect the liquid gold whilst breastfeeding. Yeah, the pumping was done after that. So yeah, number 3 is pumping. Don't like it. So number 4 is breastfeeding aversions and being touched out. Some of you might not have heard of this, and I didn't hear of it prior to having a baby, but this is so important to talk about, because all those 3 things that I said before, the reason that they were extremely hard to deal with sometimes was because of this being touched out feeling, and sometimes having breastfeeding aversions. So breastfeeding aversions is essentially when you sometimes you just don't want to breastfeed. That's probably not the right definition, but it's like having an aversion and not wanting to breastfeed for whatever reason. Different people experience it for different reasons, and I came to terms to why I was experiencing that aversion and dealt with it and sort of nipped it in the bud early on. But also that feeling of being touched out is when you've just had these lovely, beautiful but grubby hands on you all day, just grabbing at you, scratching at you, especially when you're cluster feeding. Once you just had your children's hands on you all day, or baby's hand on you all day, sometimes you just don't want to be touched. So yeah, there was this one time Curtis came and like touched me, and he just put his hand like around the back of my neck, and I just said, "Oh, don't touch me," and like shrugged him off. It's just because I'd felt like I had someone touching me all day, and I just couldn't take any more hands being put on me. And sometimes that can affect your relationship and sort of affect your mood and make you irritable. So finding out about breastfeeding aversions and feeling touched out really helped me to sort of recognize, this is what's going on here, and let's try and nip a bud in it. So how I deal with feeling touched out is, so I have to take breaks, even through those cluster feeding periods. Sometimes when I recognise I'm starting to get irritable, I've been sat down in one place too long and not done anything else, I've got to, Curtis has been amazing and he's been hands-on, so he'll offer me that time to myself and just, distracts baby, plays with her, changes her, does whatever with her whilst I just get a few minutes to myself. So yeah, I wish people talked about breastfeeding more, because if people talked about breastfeeding more, some of these things you would, know prior to being pregnant and prior to having a baby, and it wouldn't feel so new to you. Especially when you're dealing with, just having had a baby, the hormones of that, the tiredness. Understanding some of these things can help you manage some of those feelings of irritation, tiredness. And I was glad to have that community, because seeing people post and talking about some of the aversions that they had and how they dealt with it, but also how they dealt with things such as cluster feeding, really, really just helped keep me sane. But yes, as it's World Breastfeeding Week, I think it's really important that we talk about breastfeeding, normalize breastfeeding, and just let people know a bit what they're getting into. I say let people know, because I'd always planned to breastfeed, but I hadn't known how much of a undertaking it was. It's still something that I'm going to do for as long as she lets me and as long as she'll have it. I'm enjoying this journey so far, and I'm grateful that my journey has been what it is. It's been beautiful, it's been amazing. I love feeding this baby, and I love providing for her. So yeah, those are some of the things I'd wish I'd known about breastfeeding prior to having a baby, and I hope it's been helpful to you. Let me know what some of the things you wish you had known, or how your breastfeed journey is going, and I hope you have a great breastfeeding week. Thank you, Clubsters. Thanks for watching. Say bye.